was a bright morning in the city. The streets were alive with people going to work, tourists with cameras, and buses moving slowly through the traffic. In the middle of the square stood the famous palace, tall and proud, with its gates shining in the sun. In front of the palace stood the royal guards. They were known all around the world for their discipline. People came from far away to take pictures of them, to see how they stood so still without moving an inch. One of the guards on duty that day was named Peter. He had been serving for 2 years and was proud of his position. He wore the tall black hat and the red uniform that made him stand out from the crowd. His job was simple but very serious. He was to protect the gates, to keep order, and to never lose focus. Peter stood straight, his eyes looking forward, his hands on his weapon, and his boots firmly planted on the ground. Crowds of visitors passed by, pointing and whispering. Some laughed and tested him, trying to make him blink or smile, but Peter never moved. His training had taught him to stay firm no matter what happened. At the same time, not far from the palace, a biker named Mark was racing down the road. Mark was known for his loud motorcycle and his careless way of driving. He liked attention and always wanted people to look at him. He felt proud when he made noise with his engine, when people turned their heads to see who was disturbing the peace. Mark had never respected rules. He thought rules were boring. When he saw police or guards, he often laughed and said they were wasting their time. That morning, when he saw the crowd near the palace, he smiled to himself. He thought it was a good chance to show off. He drove his bike faster, revving the engine so loud that many people covered their ears. Tourists moved aside, worried about being hit. Mark parked his motorcycle near the gate and removed his helmet. His eyes went straight to the royal guard. He smirked. The guard was standing so straight, looking almost like a statue. Mark thought it was funny. Why would anyone stand still like that for hours? To him, it looked pointless. People were watching the guard with respect, but Mark felt different. He wanted to test him, maybe make the crowd laugh. Without thinking twice, he walked closer. A few tourists whispered, wondering what he was going to do. Some pulled out their phones to record. Mark stood right in front of Peter. He waved his hand in the guard's face, but Peter did not move. He made funny faces, but Peter's eyes stayed focused. The crowd was half amused and half shocked at Mark's behavior. Everyone knew it was not polite to disturb a royal guard, but Mark wanted more attention. Suddenly, he placed his hand on Peter's shoulder and gave him a push. The push was strong enough that Peter lost his balance and fell back onto the ground. Gasps filled the air. People could not believe what they had just seen. Peter quickly stood back up. His face stayed calm, but inside his heart was beating fast. It was not because of fear, but because of duty. He knew he had been attacked while on service. His training told him to stay in control, but also to respond firmly. The tourists who saw the push were angry. Some shouted at Mark, telling him to stop. Others kept recording, knowing this moment would be remembered. Mark, however, looked proud. He lifted his hands as if he had won some kind of game. He laughed loudly and looked around to see if everyone was watching him. Peter adjusted his hat and stood tall again. His boots hit the ground hard as he took his position back. He did not show pain. He did not show anger. His eyes stayed firm, but the silence around him was heavy. People waited to see what he would do. Mark shouted at him, mocking him for being too stiff. He thought he had proven that the guard was weak. But Peter was not weak. He was trained to handle such moments. He slowly moved forward, each step strong and clear. His tall figure and sharp eyes made the crowd step back. Even without words, everyone could feel the power of his presence. Mark suddenly felt less confident. His smile faded a little, but he still tried to act brave. He crossed his arms and stood firm, pretending he was not afraid. Yet the energy in the square had changed. The crowd was no longer laughing. They were waiting. 2 police officers nearby noticed the trouble and began walking toward the scene. They had seen the push, and they had also seen the guard stand back up with strength. The officers were ready to step in, but they wanted to see how the guard would handle it first. Peter stopped just a few steps away from Mark. His voice finally broke the silence. It was deep and steady, the kind of voice that carried authority. "Step back," he said firmly. The words were simple, but the way he spoke them made Mark's heart race. Mark looked around. He realized people were no longer impressed with him. Instead, they were whispering about how foolish he looked. The phones recording him were not showing a hero, but a bully. The more he thought about it, the more he felt heat rising in his face. Peter stood tall, waiting. He did not need to shout. His silence was stronger than any insult. The crowd respected him more than ever now, because he had shown discipline even after being pushed to the ground. Mark's pride was hurt, but he still tried to laugh it off. He said loudly that the guard was just a statue and that he could do whatever he wanted. Yet his words did not match the fear in his eyes. The police officers finally reached them. One officer stepped forward and placed a hand on Mark's arm. "That is enough," the officer said. Mark tried to pull away, but the officer's grip was firm. The crowd cheered, some clapping, some shouting in agreement. They wanted justice for what had just happened. Peter returned to his post, calm as ever. He did not look back at Mark. His duty was more important than his pride. That was the strength of a royal guard. But as the officers began to question Mark, something unexpected was about to happen. The morning that had begun with laughter and noise was turning into a lesson that Mark would never forget. The wheels of karma had already started to move, and soon, the biker would learn what it meant to face the consequences of his own actions. The palace square had grown silent after the push, but soon voices began to rise again. Tourists who had watched the scene were angry. Some shouted at Mark, while others pointed their cameras to capture every detail. The video of what he had done was already spreading quickly online. In minutes, people around the world would see how a biker had tried to humiliate a royal guard and failed. Mark stood between the two officers, still trying to act confident. He puffed out his chest and said loudly, "I didn't do anything wrong. He's just standing there like a doll." He laughed at his own words, but no one in the crowd laughed with him. Instead, people frowned and shook their heads. A woman in the crowd said, "That man is doing his duty. You pushed him to the ground for no reason. Shame on you." Others agreed, clapping in support of the guard. Mark's face turned red, but he forced another smile. He was not used to being corrected. All his life he believed he could do whatever he wanted and walk away. He thought the guard would ignore him, but now he realized things were not going his way. Peter, the guard, stood tall again in his position. His eyes looked forward as if the push had never happened. But his steady stance and calm presence were more powerful than any reaction. He showed that discipline was stronger than arrogance. The officers held Mark by the arm and asked for his name. Mark answered quickly, still trying to appear bold. "Mark," he said, "and I'm not afraid of anyone." But inside he was starting to feel pressure. The crowd was against him. The cameras were everywhere, and the guard's silent strength made him look small. The officers told him to move away from the palace gates. They reminded him that the royal guards were not actors or toys. They were soldiers on duty. "You cannot treat them like that," one officer said firmly. "You must respect the rules here." Mark rolled his eyes and replied, "Rules are for weak people." But his voice no longer sounded as strong as before. Some in the crowd laughed at his words, not because they agreed, but because he sounded childish. At that moment, an older man from the crowd stepped forward. He wore a neat suit and carried himself with dignity. He introduced himself as a retired soldier. "Young man," he said to Mark, "you think pushing a guard makes you powerful. But true power is in discipline, in honor, and in respect. This guard you pushed stands here for hours to protect the peace of this country. You tried to make him fall, but instead you have fallen in the eyes of everyone here." The words hit Mark harder than he expected. For a second he felt a sting of shame, but he quickly shook it off.
He did not want anyone to see him weak.
He turned his head away and muttered, "I don't care what anyone thinks." The officers were ready to take him aside, but then something happened that no one had expected. Mark's motorcycle, the same one he had parked loudly near the palace gate, began to roll backward. He had forgotten to lock the brakes properly. The heavy bike slowly leaned and then crashed to the ground with a loud thud. The mirrors broke and one handle scraped across the stone pavement. The crowd gasped, and then many people laughed. It was as if karma itself had struck. Mark's face turned pale. That motorcycle was his pride, the very thing he used to show off in front of others. Now it lay on the ground, scratched and damaged. The officers looked at each other. One of them said, "You see, when you act without respect, respect leaves you. Even your own bike has left you." The crowd laughed again, clapping at the officer's clever words. Mark quickly pulled away from the officer's grip and ran to his motorcycle. He tried to lift it, but the bike was heavy and he struggled. People took out their phones to record again. His hands shook as he pulled and pushed, finally managing to stand the bike upright. The broken mirror hung loosely, and the scratches on the side were clear for all to see. His moment of glory had turned into a moment of shame. The same crowd that he wanted to impress was now laughing at him. Some people shouted, "That's karma." Others said, "Respect the guard next time." Mark's heart raced with anger and embarrassment. He wanted to shout at everyone, but deep inside, he knew the truth. He had caused this himself. If he had not tried to humiliate the guard, none of this would have happened. But his pride stopped him from admitting it. Peter, still standing tall, did not move a muscle. He had no need to react. His silence was stronger than any lecture. The crowd looked at him with admiration. They knew he had won without lifting a hand. Mark sat on his motorcycle, trying to start it quickly so he could leave. But the engine coughed and refused to start. He tried again, twisting the handle, but it only made a strange sound. The crowd laughed louder. "Even your bike is against you," someone shouted. The officers shook their heads. They told Mark that he needed to step away and calm down. "This is not a racetrack. This is the palace. Learn respect," one officer said. Mark finally managed to start the bike after several tries. The loud engine roared again, but this time it did not sound impressive. It sounded desperate. He pulled the helmet over his head, hiding his face. The crowd watched as he drove off slowly, his pride broken. But the story did not end there. Far from it, because the videos people had recorded were already spreading across social media. Within minutes, thousands of people began watching. They saw a biker push a guard. They saw the guard stand back with strength, and they saw the biker face instant karma when his motorcycle crashed. By the afternoon, Mark's name was on everyone's lips. He thought he could leave the scene and forget it, but the world was already talking. People laughed at him, criticized him, and reminded others to respect discipline and order. At home, when Mark finally parked his damaged bike in the garage, he sat on a chair and stared at the floor. He could still hear the laughter of the crowd in his ears. He thought about the guard's steady eyes, about the officer's words, and about his own bike betraying him in front of everyone. His chest felt heavy, but instead of learning from the lesson, anger began to rise again in his heart. He clenched his fists and said to himself, "They all laughed at me. I'll show them next time. I'll prove I'm not weak." Mark did not realize that by holding on to his pride, he was preparing for more trouble. He did not understand that the path he was walking would only bring more humiliation. Karma had already given him one warning, but there were more lessons waiting ahead. And while he sat in silence, the videos of his push and his fall spread faster than ever. The city was talking, the world was watching, and Mark's story was only just beginning. The next morning, the city woke up with new gossip. In tea shops, on buses, and in offices, people were talking about one thing. The biker who had pushed a royal guard had become the center of attention. The video of the incident had spread across every screen. Newspapers printed the story. News channels showed the clip again and again. The image of Mark pushing the guard and the guard standing back tall was everywhere. But what made people laugh more was the second part, when Mark's motorcycle fell to the ground. That single moment had turned into countless jokes and comments. People wrote things like, "That's instant karma," and "Respect the guard next time." Mark, however, was not laughing. He sat in his small apartment, his phone buzzing every few seconds. Messages from friends poured in. Some laughed at him. Some asked if the video was real, and others said he had embarrassed himself in front of the whole world. His pride hurt more than the scratches on his motorcycle. He opened social media and saw his name trending. Millions of strangers were laughing at him. Some had even made short clips with music, turning his fall into comedy. The more he scrolled, the angrier he became. He threw his phone on the bed and clenched his fists. Mark told himself, "I don't care what people think." But the truth was, he did care. Every laugh felt like a knife. Every joke reminded him of his mistake. He tried to convince himself that he had only been having fun, that people were overreacting. Yet deep down, he knew he had crossed the line. Meanwhile, Peter, the royal guard, continued his duty as usual. He had seen the incident, but he had not let it disturb his mind. To him, discipline was like breathing. He did not need revenge or attention. His strength was in his silence. When he returned to the palace the next day, people clapped for him as he walked to his position. Tourists wanted pictures with him, not because he smiled, but because he had shown the world the meaning of respect. Mark avoided the city center for the next few days. He was afraid people would recognize him. Yet everywhere he went, whispers followed. At a fuel station, a man pointed at him and said, "That's him, the biker from the video." A group of young boys laughed and pretended to fall down like his motorcycle. Mark's ears burned with shame. He thought of fixing his bike to feel better. He took it to a repair shop where the mechanic looked at the scratches and broken mirror. The mechanic chuckled and said, "Did karma hit you, my friend?" Mark did not reply. He only stared at the ground and told the man to fix it quickly. At night, Mark could not sleep. He replayed the moment in his head again and again. The way the guard stood back up with calmness made him feel small. The way the crowd laughed when his bike fell made him feel weak. He wanted to erase it all, but he could not. The world had seen it, and the world did not forget easily. On the fourth day, Mark decided to ride his bike again. He wanted to prove to himself that he was still in control. He revved the engine and sped through the streets. The wind hit his face, and for a moment he felt free, but at every red light he caught people staring at him. Some pointed, some whispered, and some took pictures. He could not escape the shadow of his mistake. That evening, he parked near a cafe and sat down with a coffee. He overheard two men at the next table talking. One of them said, "That guard is a real soldier. Even after being pushed, he stayed strong. That is true discipline." The other man added, "And that biker? He only showed the world how foolish pride can be." Mark's hands tightened around his cup. The words cut him deeply. He wanted to shout and tell them to stop talking, but he knew it was useless. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone had already made their judgment. Instead of calming down, Mark grew more restless. His pride pushed him toward anger. He told himself, "They will not laugh at me again. I'll make them respect me." He did not realize that this thought was leading him down another dangerous road. A week passed, and the city slowly moved on to new topics, but the video still lived online. People could watch it any time, and they did. Mark's name had become a joke, but to him it was a scar that refused to heal. One afternoon, Mark's closest friend Daniel visited him. Daniel had seen the video too, but instead of laughing, he was worried. He sat across from Mark and said, "Listen, you made a mistake. But you can learn from it. Stop fighting against the world. Accept it and people will respect you more." Mark shook his head. "No, if I admit it, I'll look weak. I need to show them I'm strong." Daniel sighed. "Strength is not in pushing someone down. Strength is in lifting yourself up. Look at the guard. He never shouted, never fought back, but everyone respects him more than ever." Mark looked away. He did not want to hear it. His pride was too heavy. Instead of listening, he said, "You don't understand. I need to do something big to fix this," Daniel warned him. "Don't go down that path. Pride will only bring you more trouble." But Mark did not reply. His mind was already forming another plan. That night, as Mark sat alone, he thought about returning to the palace square. He imagined standing there in front of the same guard, this time proving he was not afraid. He thought about revving his bike louder, shouting louder, and showing the world that he was still in control. But he forgot one thing. The world had already seen who he was. The world had already judged. And the more he tried to fight against it, the deeper he would sink into his own downfall. Far away in the quiet of the palace grounds, Peter stood once again at his post. He did not know what Mark was planning, and he did not need to know. For him, every day was the same. Stand tall, stay calm, protect the peace. His honor came not from what others said, but from what he lived by. The paths of the biker and the guard were not finished crossing. Fate was preparing another meeting, and karma was not done teaching its lessons. A week later, the city center was crowded as usual. Tourists lined up in front of the palace gates, snapping pictures of the guards. Children pointed at the tall hats, and parents explained how the guards never moved, no matter what happened. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but there was also respect in the crowd. Everyone knew that the guards stood not for entertainment but for duty. Among the crowd, Mark stood silently, his helmet under his arm. He had come back. He had told himself again and again that he needed to face the same place where his pride had been broken. He wanted to prove to himself that he was not afraid. His motorcycle was repaired, its scratches mostly gone, but in his heart the scar of shame remained. He scanned the square and found the guard he had pushed before. It was Peter, standing tall as ever. His face was calm, his eyes steady, his boots planted firmly. Mark felt a strange pull in his chest. This was the man who had not fought back yet had defeated him in front of everyone. The crowd did not notice Mark at first. People were too busy taking photos. Mark stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing on the stone ground. His hands were tight around the helmet and his jaw clenched. He told himself, "This time I'll control the story. This time I'll win." But deep inside, a small voice whispered to him that maybe this was not the right way. He ignored it. His pride was stronger than his doubt. He stopped a few feet away from Peter. Tourists began to notice. Some recognized him right away. Whispers spread through the crowd like a wave. "That's him. The biker from the video." Phones came out quickly. Lenses turned toward him. Mark's heart raced, but he stood firm, pretending not to care. Peter did not move. He stared forward just as his training demanded. His duty was clear. He was not to react to troublemakers unless there was a real threat. But he recognized Mark. He knew the same man had returned. Mark spoke loudly, his voice carrying across the square. "You all think he is stronger than me. You all think I lost that day. But today I'll show you the truth." The crowd gasped. Some tourists shook their heads, whispering that he should not disturb the guard again. Others raised their phones higher, sensing that something was about to happen. Mark stepped closer, just like before. He waved his hand in front of Peter's face. Again, the guard did not move. Mark's voice grew louder. "See? He's nothing but a statue. He does not fight back because he cannot, and you all cheer for him." But unlike last time, the mood of the crowd was different. People were not laughing. They were frowning. They were not impressed. They remembered how he had humiliated himself before. To them, this was not bravery, it was foolishness repeating itself. Peter's stillness carried more weight than ever. His silence seemed louder than Mark's words. It was as if the air around him said, "Strength is not noise. Strength is calm." Mark felt sweat on his forehead. He had expected cheers, maybe laughter, but the crowd gave him only stares of disapproval. He felt their judgment pressing down on him. Yet his pride refused to let him stop. He shouted again, "He will not move. He will not fight. And you call him a hero, but I am not afraid of him." At that moment, a young boy from the crowd stepped forward with his father. The boy looked at Mark and said, "He is not a hero because he fights. He is a hero because he does not need to fight." The crowd clapped, cheering for the boy's words. Mark froze, his mouth open but no words coming out. Even a child had spoken truth that he could not deny. The officers from before appeared once again, moving toward the scene. They had been watching from a distance, ready in case Mark caused more trouble. One officer called out, "Not again, Mark, you should leave." The crowd agreed. Voices rose together, some chanting, "Leave him alone. Respect the guard." Mark's chest tightened. He had returned to fix his pride, but instead the weight of shame grew heavier. Then karma struck again in a new way. A strong wind blew through the square, knocking Mark's helmet from his hand. It rolled across the stones, bouncing until it hit the feet of a tourist. The tourist picked it up and held it high, showing everyone. The crowd laughed, not cruelly, but with the kind of laughter that comes when arrogance is defeated by something simple. Mark ran forward to grab the helmet, but in his rush he slipped on the smooth stone floor. His foot slid out and he fell to one knee. Gasps filled the air, followed by laughter and applause. Cameras flashed everywhere. His fall had been captured by dozens of people. Mark stood quickly, brushing off his clothes, his face burning red. He snatched the helmet back, but he could not erase the image the crowd had just seen. Once again, his pride had betrayed him. The officer approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That is enough. You will not disturb the guard again. Leave now before things get worse." Mark looked at the crowd. There was no admiration in their eyes, only disappointment and pity. He looked at Peter, who still stood silently, unshaken, like a tower of discipline. For the first time, Mark felt a deep crack inside his heart. No matter how loud he shouted, no matter how much he tried to show off, he could never break that calm strength. With heavy steps, he turned away. He put on his helmet and walked to his motorcycle. The crowd parted, letting him through, but their eyes followed him. Some shook their heads, some whispered lessons to their children, and others simply clapped again for the guard. Mark started his motorcycle and drove off slowly. This time he did not rev the engine. He did not look back. His chest felt heavy. His pride crushed deeper than before. When he reached home, he parked the motorcycle and sat in silence. His mind replayed the moment when the boy had called the guard a hero. His heart replayed the laughter when he slipped. He could not escape the truth. Daniel, his friend, came to visit again that night. He listened to the story and sighed. "Mark, how many lessons will it take? You cannot win against calmness with arrogance. The more you fight it, the more you lose. Mark buried his face in his hands. He wanted to argue, but he had no words left. His pride had led him to the same square twice, and both times he had walked away with shame. But karma was not done yet. Mark did not know that another twist was waiting for him. The world had seen his second attempt, and the story was spreading again. This time, it would not just be about a bike falling or a slip on the ground. It would become something larger, something that would decide how his story would end. The morning air was crisp and quiet in the city, but the palace square was busy as always. Tourists arrived with cameras, families walked hand in hand, and the guards stood tall at their posts. Among them was Peter, calm and focused. His presence was a symbol of discipline and respect. He did not notice the crowd's attention on him anymore because he was always ready, always alert, and always patient. Mark, on the other hand, had not stayed away. After the two public incidents, he felt the weight of his mistakes, but pride still burned inside him. He wanted to fix his image, to show everyone that he could be brave, that he could command respect. He had been thinking about this morning for days. He arrived early, parking his motorcycle carefully this time. He removed his helmet slowly, looking at the square. The tourists began to gather, some whispering and pointing. Many of them remembered him from the videos. Mark took a deep breath. He wanted to act differently, to show that he was in control and maybe, just maybe, to redeem himself. As he walked toward the gates, he saw Peter standing at his post. The guard's calm demeanor had not changed. He looked straight ahead, silent, confident. Mark realized that no matter what he did, the guard's strength came from within, not from applause or fear. Mark approached cautiously. He did not wave, he did not shout, and he did not push. For the first time, he simply stood at a distance watching. Peter did not react. His eyes were steady, and his presence alone commanded respect. A small child from the crowd ran forward and asked Peter why he never moved, even when someone pushed him. Peter knelt slightly to speak to the child. "I stand because my duty is to protect, not to fight," he said simply. Strength is calm. Respect is earned through patience, not anger. Mark listened quietly. The words pierced him in a way nothing else had before. He remembered the falls, the laughter of the crowd, the slipping of his helmet, and the crash of his bike. All those moments had taught him something he had not wanted to admit. He had been trying to prove strength through noise, force, and attention, but the guard had shown him that true strength comes from patience, discipline, and respect. Mark's friend Daniel arrived, walking quickly to his side. "Look at him, Mark," Daniel said softly. "He doesn't need to prove anything. That is why everyone respects him, and that is what you need to learn." Mark nodded slowly. He felt a strange mixture of relief and shame. Relief because he finally understood the truth. Shame because he had wasted so much time trying to force respect instead of learning it. The day moved on. Mark did not try to show off. He stayed quietly at a distance, observing the life around the square. He saw tourists taking pictures, families laughing, and Peter standing tall and unwavering. Mark realized that no one would ever remember his shouting or his push, but everyone would remember the guard's calmness. Suddenly, a small incident happened that would teach Mark a deeper lesson. A tourist tripped near the gate, dropping a camera. Before anyone could react, Peter stepped forward, carefully helping the person stand and picking up the camera. He returned it with a kind smile, all while staying calm and professional. Mark watched in silence. He realized that true strength was not only in standing tall but in serving others with humility. The guard did not need to fight to be respected. He helped quietly, yet his actions spoke louder than words. Mark's mind replayed the moments when he had tried to dominate the scene with his motorcycle, his shouting, and his push. None of those actions had earned him respect. In fact, they had only brought shame. Now he understood the meaning of karma, not as punishment but as a mirror of his own actions. Every push, every act of arrogance had come back to him. He looked at the crowd, and for the first time he felt a wish to apologize. Not publicly, not for attention, but quietly, for himself. He wanted to change. He realized that the easiest thing in life was to demand respect, but the hardest and most rewarding thing was to earn it through character. The afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows across the square. Peter remained at his post, calm and composed. Mark approached him quietly, removing his helmet. Peter noticed him but did not react immediately. He remained steady, knowing that his duty was to observe and serve, not to judge. Mark took a deep breath. I wanted to say thank you, he said softly. You have taught me something important. I was wrong. I wanted attention, but I see now that true strength comes from patience and respect. Peter looked at him and nodded slightly. Understanding this is the first step, he said in his calm voice. Strength is shown through actions, not words. Pride without control is weakness. Respect is earned, never demanded. Mark felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in days, he smiled genuinely, not for attention, but because he had learned something that mattered more than pride. He had faced the consequences of his actions, and now he understood how to move forward. As Mark walked away from the gates, he no longer felt the need to prove himself. The crowd did not notice him anymore, but that was not important. He had finally understood the lesson that the world had been trying to teach him. Respect, patience, and humility were far stronger than noise, force, or arrogance. He mounted his motorcycle slowly, not to show off, but to leave quietly. The engine started smoothly, and he drove away without revving. The world around him continued as before, but Mark's inner world had changed. The lessons of the palace square, of the guard, and of karma had reshaped him. From that day on, Mark acted differently. He no longer sought attention through reckless behavior. He treated people with kindness and thought before acting. He remembered the image of Peter standing tall, and it guided him in every choice he made. The memory of his own mistakes became a lesson rather than a source of shame. In the palace square, life continued. Peter remained at his post, guarding the gates with calm strength. Tourists continued to admire him, not for fear but for the quiet power he carried. And somewhere in the city, a biker who once sought attention had learned the true meaning of respect and the quiet force of discipline. Mark's story became known, not as a tale of pride and humiliation, but as a story of learning and change. He had faced karma, felt its weight, and had emerged with understanding. He would never forget the lessons of the day he pushed a royal guard, nor the way the world responded. Some lessons are harsh, some are quiet, but the strongest lessons are those that change the heart. And for Mark, the memory of Peter's calm strength would stay with him forever. The city continued its busy life, but the story of the guard and the biker became a quiet reminder for all who heard it. True strength is patience. Respect is earned, and every action has its own consequence. Mark had learned that the hard way, but he had learned it well.